Hello and welcome to today's second discussion, where we are going to delve into Asilia past, present and future. I'm going to apologise in advance for any connection problems. We're all coming to you from East Africa this evening. Gerard and I are in Nairobi and Jeroen's across the border in Arusha. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mercedes Bailey and I have been with Asilia for over 9 years now. The first half of that was as the brand manager, and for the past 4 years I've run our PR department. This evening, I'm joined by Jeroen and Gerard Beaton. Jeroen is the co-founder and CEO of Asilia. Jeroen left Holland in 2002 to permanently settle in Tanzania, and Asilia was born in 2004. Gerard is Kenyan, born and raised, and brought his family business, Rakero Camp in the Masai Mara, into the Asilia fold in 2009. Over a decade later, he is now the Group Operations Director. Please post any questions you may have in the chat box, and we will endeavour to answer them before the end of the session. To kick things off, Jeroen, many people know that you're Dutch and started your career in the financial sector, but what actually brought you to Tanzania in 2002?
Thanks, Mercedes, and thanks all of you for joining us and taking your time and interest in our story as Asilia. Yeah, you're right, and we settled permanently in Arusha in 2002, but frankly, we've been traveling back and forth to East Africa since 1993. We got married in Arusha in 1995. And to be honest, our decision to move and settle permanently in Arusha had nothing to do with tourism at all. What we actually came to do was something that we were passionate about and really wanted to get going at some point in our life, and it was a charity foundation, a charity initiative to help rural communities with education opportunities. It's a small organization of volunteers, it's still running today. We are supporting 7 primary schools. We've been building 2 secondary schools. There's a scholarship program. And it's a beautiful small initiative, and it actually taught us a lot that also helped us with getting Asilia Giving going. But anyway, to come back to tourism, so once you settled in Arusha as, let's say, capital city of the safari industry in Tanzania, we got to know some owner-run companies, people like Paul Oliver, people like Damien Bell from Soccer. And, you know, these were people with a fantastic offering, fantastic locations, but they're really struggling when it comes to financials, investments, the arrival of internet and how to go about that. So that's basically how Asilia was born. We decided to join forces and to basically do what we were all passionate about, and in the realization that if we could do that with some scale and at the same time preserving that family spirit, we would be able to make a bigger impact than each on our own.
Fantastic, thank you. Gerard, your founding business partner back in 1995 was Jackson Lucia, one of the first Maasai guides. How did this partnership come about? Because at the time it was very groundbreaking. And how do you think it's shaped your way of doing business?
Thanks, Mercedes, and good evening to all of you joining us. So Jackson and my father worked together for quite some time. His father was one of the last Ndorobo trackers in the Mara region. And as my father started his walking safaris across the Mara, he was pretty interested in giving a cultural insight to the Ndorobo culture to our guests. So that was how the original relationship started. Jackson had some education at the local Catholic school and then became my father's spotter. And he was literally like a sponge. Any book that was given to him, he would sort of learn it from cover to cover. And before we knew it, you know, he was a guide and ultimately became my business partner. And yeah, he's now a successful private guide, a film presenter, and also owns a few tourism investments in the Mara. At the time we started in the 90s, there were very few Maasai guides and even fewer, if any, Maasai investors in the tourism industry. We felt it was important that they had a stakehold, you know, either in getting their story across to the guests coming through the Mara, but also, you know, in the industry as a whole. So an idea was born between Jackson and my father at the time to start a guiding school. And while it was quite a long haul, Kayaki Guiding School started. And I would say today we've probably had close to 200 guides go through that. and now it's pretty uncommon not to have a Maasai guide. And the great news is even a handful of camps in the Mara that are now wholly owned by Maasai, or even local community members, some of the neighbouring communities as well.
Thank you. So you built this successful business, and it was owner run and managed, and it was with Jackson and with your wife Rainey. So what made you partner with Asilia in 2004?
So we had a joint venture at the time with Karandani Safaris, one of the oldest, I think the oldest actually, safari company in East Africa. And some of their partners, their guides, happened to be shareholders in Asilia. So as we worked with them on a camp called Rekero Kodogo in the first, one of the first conservancies on the edge of the Mara, Lari Muturugi, they connected us up with some of the team from Asilia because they could see that we shared similar values and basically a similar vision. We were running 3 operations at the time. We had Rekero Camp going, Rekero Kodogo, and Rekero Homes. Jackson had 5 children. We had a couple of children. He was trying to launch a film career. So we were pretty stretched. When you're owner-run, you're sort of a jack of all trades, but a master of none. So it was quite appealing to join a team where you had some specialist marketing folks around the table. Most have grown up in East Africa as well. Folks that could go out there and raise the money when we needed it. So that's how we sort of got interested. We chatted for a couple of years. Actually, we went down and looked at their operation. They looked at our operation. Naibosho Conservancy was in the kind of, it was, the seeds were being planted at the time of the community, and we were struggling to run the 3 operations and go into Naibosho, and this was exactly what the founders of Asilia were interested in. So really it was over Naibosho Conservancy we came together, and for myself, conservation has much more impact at a larger scale. It's tough as an owner-run business to be able to attend all the meetings that you need to actually make an impact at the relevant level where it'll become influential in the future. So that was really the reason why we came together, was a shared vision.
So coming from that owner-run background, Asilia is almost perceived as the antithesis of that sometimes. Although we work hard to retain the character of our camps, we are a major group, we are a major player, and there are pros and cons to this. You've touched on it slightly already, but what do you think they are?
Well, at the time, I think Asilia had 5 camps when we joined in 2009, and to us that was huge. We're obviously a little bit bigger than that now. And we do time to time, people mention Asilia is a big corporate, etc. But actually for us on the ground, we're one big family, and every camp has got its own character. I mean, Matemwe, Rekero, to name a few, Oliver's camp, we've got staff that have been there for over 25 years. They were there way before Asilia joined, and really it's them that shape the atmosphere in the camp. For me, I've only seen advantages. I was definitely nervous going into it, and kind of thought, well, if it doesn't work after 3 years, I can go and explore something else. But 11 years later, I'm here and loving it. And operating at the scale we do, it allows us to do things, really properly. I mean, our health and safety agenda, our crisis management team, when the situation does occur, it helps me sleep easy at night to know that's all in place and that we're on top of it. Again, as an owner-run business, I struggled to keep on top of that and make sure all the I's were dotted and T's were crossed. The other exciting thing is, whenever a new project comes up or any new initiative, we've got a really, comprehensive team, and we can mobilize very quickly, whether it's commercially or operationally, and get the job done. And I love that.
Thank you. Jeroen, I'm going to fast forward to 2015, when Asilia made the very bold move of opening the first all-women's camp on the continent. It was bold and brave and maybe divisive in some senses. What do you think the effects of that were internally on our culture at Asilia, in Tanzania, and in the industry as a whole?
Yeah, thanks, Mercedes. Well, to be honest, I mean, it was born partly out of frustration. We had the topic of gender balance on our agenda for years, and we weren't making any progress. We tried to hire 1, 2, 3 women in each of our camps, and there were all sorts of issues. So it was really a kind of a breakthrough initiative to make a statement to the outside world, but as much also to the inside, to our bigger family, and to show to everyone that that it is actually possible to run a safari camp out there in the bush, and that women are as capable as men. And yes, we got a lot of international PR press, and that was fantastic. But what was really nice is that within our own organization, we saw this change in mindset. We saw, people working in Arusha, other camps that say, hey, it's not just a future for my sons, but also for my daughters. This is exciting. So that's been wonderful. And we see it's now also easier in other camps to go along the same path. So that it worked out really well.
Yeah, I must say I really agree with you. The achievement internally, I think, by far eclipses the sort of the external, awards and validation. But that shift in culture amongst our own family is something to be really proud of. And it's great to now see the sort of all women, other things happening, all female flights flying or ranger patrols. So no, it's exciting to be part of a revolution. Okay, I'm going to fast forward to the present, and I think everyone agrees we are living and working in extraordinary times, but I think especially given our presence in Tanzania, we are running an operation in a country with its very own set views on COVID that are just not shared with the rest of the world. The country's been under increasing pressure this week from the World Health Organization, asking for accurate data on case numbers. Jeroen, you've been spending a fair amount of time in Tanzania. Can you give us an update on the situation in the country?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Fortunately, as an extended family, we haven't had any major incidents so far within the family in terms of among staff or guests any severe illness. But it's been a challenging time, as we all know. I think when we look at it at a country level, we also need to, I guess, apply some realism. Well, we've seen everywhere in the world politicians taking different approaches to how to handle it. For a country like Tanzania with limited health infrastructure and many other severe diseases that they need to manage as well, I think one of the good things is that there hasn't been a lockdown. So in terms of people, at least one way or the other, continuing to make a livelihood is obviously also very important. There have been some setback. I think what's good to know for everyone on the call is, first of all, despite, let's say, some of the sounds that came out, we have been able to do adequate testing for all our guests, which has helped a lot, of course, in terms of getting onto international flights and back into their own country. And the other thing is we are actually now seeing in the last few weeks a definite change at the political level, at the government level. In fact, I had some government meetings earlier today. Everyone is wearing masks and it's taken very seriously. So I'm sure we'll find a way forward in this, one way or the other.
Thank you. Another question for you, Jeroen. There was a lot of discussion last year in the American media about safari companies not welcoming Black African travelers. Your family is mixed race. Do you think this was a legitimate allegation? And is it something your family has ever experienced?
No, not as a family, actually not. And I think in general, when it comes, and we talk in the safari industry, right? And I think in the safari industry, let's say the warmth and hospitality throughout definitely our part of the world is fantastic. And that beats any form of those issues when it comes to the experience in camp and on the ground. I do think at the same time that, as a safari industry, we need to be conscious of our blind spots. We are rooted in some aspects in a colonial tradition. And let's say the romance of the colonial style safari has some delicate aspects. And I think we all seeing that, especially with younger generations, that, some people take issue. And that is that's something to be conscious of. We're very conscious of it, obviously, by nature. We have throughout our organization a very diverse makeup at every level of the company. And at the same time, this is something that everyone needs to be on top of. It's very easy to have, let's say, subconscious prejudices that one needs to be aware of, as we all know. And I think as an industry as a whole, that's an important aspect to be on top of that and to also reinvent ourselves along those lines. Make sure that we can use the word woke, but even apart from that, make absolutely sure that we are on top of these issues.
Thank you, Jeroen. I'm interested to know what you think about domestic tourism. Why do you think domestic tourism is important? What role do you think it plays?
Well, it's actually, I would argue that, I'm not sure if I'm live now. Yeah, there I am. I think that is an issue that's closely related. I think as an industry, let's forget about the topic of racism, but I think there's another issue that we need to be aware of, not just as a safari industry, but conservation as well. And all of us are very passionate about conservation. And there's a big risk if you're kind of, slightly outside society, if you like. In order to be effective, we have to be an integral part of it. And an integral part of it also means that the services that we offer are an integral part of society. So I think domestic tourism plays a very important role, making sure that what we're trying to achieve, both in the safari industry commercially and what we're trying to achieve in the field of conservation and rural support, that there's a full buy-in and understanding and that be an integral part of the societies where we operate. And domestic tourism can play does play a massive role in that. So one way or the other, it's really key that we make that work.
It's very interesting. In the last year, I've been so cognizant of how much of my time was spent building our brand in our source markets. So running off to London, running off to New York to build our brand with our end consumer, when actually building a brand where you operate is equally as important, especially when you're socially responsible and involved in conservation and involved in empowerment. So yeah, working with local media has been an interesting challenge that I've enjoyed this year. So continuing the topic of conservation, which has been as pertinent as the decline in tourist numbers. Gerard, tourism has historically been critical to protecting ecosystems worldwide. COVID-19 and a sudden decrease in tourism has also revealed the overdependence of some communities on tourism. Can you provide some perspective on how a decline in tourism has impacted the communities with whom we partner and the local conservation efforts we're supporting?
Yes, absolutely, you're quite right. The pandemic's really hit our local communities, whether it be around the parks, reserves, or the conservancies. They're extremely dependent on tourism, whether it's for employment reasons or in the case of the community conservancies, they obviously get lease payments every month. There's also all the spin-off that comes, either the supply lines or beadwork, milk. There's just so much that feeds into the local community. We've been aware of this over the years, especially in the Mara, where the lease payments are, they do require a high occupancy to make them work. So we have been basically experimenting mainly with livestock, trying to generate more of a revenue through beef, etc. But we remain way too dependent. As Asilia, we decided, we would come hell or high water, we would keep a circuit open in each country, even if it didn't make financial sense. We wanted to keep at least a trickle of income getting into the local communities and give them some hope that tourism was still functioning. And that's actually worked really well. We've seen definitely some increase in the bushmeat poaching around these parks and reserves. In the conservancies, there's been more, grazing infringement, firewood collection, kind of a need to utilize the conservancy more due to lack of income. We haven't experienced a rise in elephant poaching or rhino poaching in the areas that we operate, mainly because we've got some great NGOs like the Mara Elephant Project, who have fortunately remained well funded through this crisis and have done a fantastic job.
So I have another question for you. As you have one foot in each camp, you're a conservationist and you work in tourism. Do you think that tourism is a long-term solution to conservation funding? You said we're already seeing some diversification, but what do you think conservation funding is going to look like in 10 years' time?
Well, I think this crisis is kind of the perfect challenge for us, because we had recognized it, but we hadn't necessarily done enough about it. We've been very fortunate that our partners in the conservancies, the communities, have recognized, the challenges of the pandemic, and they've been very accommodating, and we've managed to negotiate a 12-month lease reduction by 50%. We've also had, donors come to the table and offer us as tourism operators soft loans, and we've received some grants which have meant we can keep our rangers on full salaries and keep the boots on the ground. But yeah, long term, we've got to focus more on the kind of the value add revenue streams. We'd really focused on the beef side of the cattle enterprise, and actually during the crisis, the local communities have turned to milk. So historically, they would only drink milk, for sustainable consumption in the village, and the cattle was more part of the culture, and they would trade with the cattle. But we've seen in the last 6 months across Samara, every local community has a big Brookside milk truck parked up for the day, and there's all the little motorbikes are coming in with 100 litres on each motorbike and decanting into the milk truck, and then the milk trucks all head off, to Nairobi to the milk factory. So they've been, working on this new enterprise themselves, which has been quite exciting and interesting to watch. Yeah, I mean, during the crisis, we've all had quite a lot of time to be able to sit on Zoom calls and connect with the relevant partners across the world, whether it be Conservation International or the Nature Conservancy. And we've had some really exciting developments. And so the avenue that we're exploring at the moment, which has kind of basically could answer a lot of problems, is carbon. We've looked at it in the past, but it's quite a big financial commitment to sort of get in the game and do the assessments and register yourself. But our recent partnership across some Samara Conservancies with Conservation International has finally made this a reality, and there's some, as I say, some really exciting progress there.
That sounds brilliant. I'm excited to have some Masai cheese and ice cream next time I'm in the Mara. Or am I getting a bit ahead of myself there, maybe?
No, you can now get ice cream in Talek.
Oh, fantastic. Gerard, sticking with you, looking at both the past and the future, how has the safari offering changed since you started Recaro? And what do you think the younger generation is going to be looking for in the future? Do you think the traditional morning game drive, afternoon tea, evening game drive is enough for the next generation? But how has it changed in your time working in the industry?
Well, when we started, it was a case of getting your printed brochure together, and you'd mail it off from Nairobi, and they might get it a month later. Then we really, got with it and got them sent in bulk to our agents worldwide. And today there's just so much available on social media. There's so much information available at travelers' fingertips. The kind of traditional 2 game drives, and if you're really brave going on a walk approach is definitely going out the window. We as a company love creating new adventure offerings. That's what really excites us. So we've had a lot of fun putting them together, but we also constantly get requests that you've just never even thought of. I mean, I've been working on a couple that wants to kite surf across Lake Victoria from the Tanzania side to Uganda. So yeah, no, we do need to reinvent the wheel slightly. We feel that we've got a very comprehensive offering in our Asilia Adventure portfolio. These include everything from multi-day walking adventures from Ngorongoro Crater down to Lake Natron, or a 5-day walk across the Mara. You can helicopter up onto Mount Kenya and go fly fishing in the morning, and plenty of cultural offerings as well. So no, the traditional offering has definitely moved on to a much more exciting offering for both us who are providing it and for the traveller.
Thank you. Jeroen, a similar question for you, but focusing more on the commercial aspect of what we do. So given all the change and disruption, how do you think the way people book travel is going to change? I was very interested to see this week that America's largest travel magazine, Travel and Leisure, has just launched an online booking platform. So they're going to monetize the booking process. So what do you think we've all got in store in the commercial space?
Well, so I'll come to that in a moment. And indeed, we are in a time of change. Also, just to come back, Gerard is quite humble in the sense of what we've been what we've been able to pull off for guests. And I think one of the things that we're very proud of in the journey of Asilia is that other than just running the safaris, we've done some pretty spectacular film outfitting jobs where Gerard was primarily involved himself. And that has really, you know, gotten us into the next level of logistical challenges. And of course, Disney's Lion King is a big example, but there have been many other productions over the years. And that has really taught us how to move out and about and doing some spectacular stuff that is logistically challenging. But also, if you talk about immersive experiences, yeah, that really taught us how to be on top of our game in that space. But coming back to your question, when it comes to the commercial side of changes, I think, yeah, as Jeroen mentioned, we are really the only safari operator that I know of, the larger players that operated throughout the entire crisis. We obviously, being in Tanzania, that as a country opened as the very first back in June, and we had camps open since then. I've been in camp many times during this period, talking to guests, and you see all sorts of changes. And I think we haven't seen the end of it. We're still trying to get our head around it. But what you definitely see is guests that I would, you know, bet my house on that in the past they would have, you know, booked their safari in a very different way, and, you know, 12 months in advance and all that. And now it is like 2 weeks before travel, and also some horror stories in terms of either with agents or suppliers or whatever, phone not being picked up and how to go about it. So it has shaken our industry in some ways, and we see various trends. I think it's early to say how exactly that plays out, but yeah, the changes in what we see in booking horizon, that's a very definite that I'm sure everyone also on this call experiences, and some of that may well be structural from now on. Many questions around deposits, obviously payment, where's the money going, how does it work, etc. So we're playing that out. I think there's some trends that we saw already that we feel will continue, will maybe accelerate. And we have invested quite a lot in technology in recent years, and we're kind of doubling down on that because we think that as a safari industry, we were a little bit on the back foot in that space, and yeah, our guests, they expect a lot, and now even more so, and quicker so, and more last minute so, in terms of availability and all that. So we really need to master that. I also believe, and I've been saying that for years, and I continue to very much feel that a true value-add agent can always play a very important role in making the link between, you know, what's in the minds of the travelers in our key source markets in terms of expectations, fears, and all that, and what's happening on the ground in Africa. And so I think despite everything that's changing, I also think as long as there's a clear value-add proposition as an agent, I think that will. I think the contrast might be bigger. I think sort of any sort of middle of the road offering is vulnerable, but if there's true value add, then everyone has a big role to play also in the future.
Thank you, Jeroen. So to end on a positive in these turbulent times, what thing are you most proud of that Asilia has achieved? Gerard, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, for me, it would be our commitment to positive impact at the level that it's kind of helping, you know, the policy countrywide within the East African environment. We're very fortunate to have shareholders, whether they be, you know, the employees of the company or external investors that truly believe in this. It is the DNA of our company. You know, so our Usangu Wetlands project, we've worked in, you know, Rubondo Island now for 9 or 10 years. And for me personally, I've obviously been very involved in the Naibosho story, you know, taking over a piece of community land adjoining the Mara Game Reserve and developing it into a crucial part of the Greater Mara ecosystem. And you know, it's got to a point where prior to the pandemic, it was thriving. So, you know, I enjoy the fact that we invest in areas that, you know, will take 10 years plus to thrive. And you know, it's not all about just sticking a camp right in the middle of the Serengeti, the Mara. I mean, obviously those are important to make the business numbers add up, But it would definitely be our positive impact involvement. That's what really excites me.
Jeroen, your turn. What are you most proud of in the last 17 years?
Well, I think really the fact that the vision that we had back in 2004 and where we've gotten to, that we have been able to be true to vision and at the same time making it a reality at scale. And it was never about any of the individuals involved. I think that was one of our strengths from day one, that it was a real team effort with a diverse team, in fact. And everyone bringing unique skills and capabilities to the table. And that has gone to an entirely new level. We have now technologically advanced people. We have some of the best walking guides from various nationalities. We do fantastic projects, and Gerard mentioned some of them. And it's just going. It's like and it has grown beyond what we expected, which is fantastic, and what makes me very proud. And it has grown beyond any in the specific individual or investor. It has survived the financial crisis, and we came out stronger then. We will survive this one, and we'll come out stronger this time. And so it leads its own life, and it's a force for good, and that is something that we're really, really proud of. And what about you, Mercedes?
Yes, I want to answer this one too. We didn't set that up. I'm really proud of how bold we are. I think we're not reckless, but I think in the industry we are perceived as quite a safe option and quite reliable. But in the last 10 years, I'm so proud of some of the incredibly bold moves we've made. I mean, we are on Robondo Island, which is just extraordinary. That leap of faith to do Dunia, that leap of faith to do the Highlands, and it makes me really proud to be part of a company that is bold and pioneering, whilst being safe and reliable as well. I enjoy our boldness. So there we go. Okay, it's question time, and there are some crackers. Right, starting with you, Jeroen. Would Asilia look in other countries for opportunities with conservation and wildlife tourism, where there is no competition from other ground agents? This is great. I'd love to know where we might go next as well.
We'd definitely be interested. Of course, in the middle of a crisis, the first priority is to get through at the other end and take it from there. But the answer is yes. Gerard already mentioned it. We're proud to have some strong institutional investors on board from Scandinavia and elsewhere that keen to join us in our journey. And whatever fits our overall vision outside the current borders, we'll definitely consider. We know that that's not an easy thing to do, and you need to run into the right partnership typically with people on the ground. At the time, teaming up with the likes of Gerard was fantastic, and we'd be very keen to do that also elsewhere, because it's really the knowledge on the ground that sets you apart in our industry, I believe. So open eyes, definitely. I can't give you any specific countries just yet. We have been operating a DMC service in Rwanda and Uganda for some time. We will definitely continue doing that and expand that where possibly. Yeah, hopefully along those lines we'll be able to add more countries down the line.
Same question, slightly different. If you could go anywhere, if you could open something anywhere, where would you go? I think I lost my heart to Mozambique 15 years ago, and that's where I would go. But where would you go, Jeroen?
Oh my God! I mean, there's so many super exciting destinations that would really need the tourism support, right? I mean, what the people have been pulling off in the Congo is fantastic. As some of our colleagues are trying to go into Angola. We, at our own time, had our plans in Gorongosa at the time in Mozambique, as you remember. Unfortunately, at that time, the political, it was actually more like warfare on the ground. So we really had to retract from that. But I think ideally an area that, yes, does have the potential to make tourism really work and at the same time can push the envelope when it comes to making an impact on the ground rather than doing the standard thing. If you ask me what would we really like, any of those would be fantastic. It's just that how to bring the pieces of the puzzle together and have some firepower to make it happen.
Gerard, quickly, same question to you. If you could start an operation anywhere, where would you do it?
For me personally, my heart is a little bit in Uganda. My grandfather started the national parks there. He was the first director of national parks. So I've always had a pull towards Uganda, and we've explored it several times. So yeah, the Uganda, Rwanda, geography would be probably my personal favorite step to take next.
Fantastic. Right, I'm just looking at the questions. This is, I think, a question for you, Gerard, from Sarah Humble. Training is at the heart of what Asilia does. We really have created an incredible in-house training scheme. There was no walking guide training in Tanzania. And thanks to Asilia, we now have our own walking guide training. We've created a whole generation of Tanzanian walking guides. But also in other areas as well, in management, in cooking, and most recently we received a grant to enable our staff to cross-train during this period, so waiters could train to be guides. We've been asked, do you feel there would be a possibility to expand Asilia into providing country-accredited training, in particular for those from lower socio-economic groups, to grow potential from your immediate communities?
I mean, we would definitely love to do this. It's right up our alley. So we have, over the last 7 or 8 years, created a training department. When you're opening a new camp virtually every year, we just had to do it through a need, really. And got a very comprehensive training department now. We had walking guides coming in from Zimbabwe when at that time. We now have 12 fully qualified walking guides in Tanzania, and another 7 that are just doing their final advanced stage. So we've kind of proven, that it can work, and that our in-house training team, whether it be on the chef side, or whether it's just general service training, it works, and it's been amazing to watch this recent training program where we're fortunate to receive a grant from our investor, IFU, where we upskilled, chefs became waiters, they trained as waiters, and we had, night watchmen training as housekeepers. It was amazing to see, and such a morale boost, and most of them are from the local community. So we've always had the dream of having a training camp that basically, was open for guests, and you just cycled everybody through there, and you had your best, heads of department there as the mentors and trainers. And we've discussed it long and hard and never quite made it happen. But as of this year, we have one of our camps that didn't have the highest occupancy. We closed it down for 6 months, and that's exactly what we've done. So now we're exploring doing that in one wing of one of our camps, yet to be decided. So that would be the perfect opportunity to be able to work with the local communities and make that dream come true.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Jeroen, we've got quite a few questions coming through on the commercial side of things. So an interesting question from David. On the topic of the domestic market, roughly what percentage of your annual occupancy is made up of the domestic or SADC market? So it would be interesting to compare, say, 3 years ago versus what happened last season.
So I think, this is a bigger discussion. When I answered that question, and it was in a general context how important it is for the safari industry as a whole. If you now break it down, well, I think in the last year, obviously, we got a lot of resident business. So that percentage that in terms of, let's say, bed nights, it will have been in the 30% or so, possibly more. I don't have it by heart. In dollar terms, that will be less. I think what you find, if I travel around within East Africa, you'll see not just domestic tourism, but you see in general when let's say waves of new segments of tourists come through to the safari industry, what you typically find is that the bigger, let's say, traditional hotels are typically the first point that maybe also for price point, but also from, let's say, comfort zone. People typically first get into, and again, I think that is super important when it comes to the high-end, smaller safari camps. That is typically for people that maybe come for a second or third time. That is not necessarily what people domestically immediately see as the obvious choice. So I think that that will take a while before those are larger segments in our industry. Also, just in terms of spending, right? We all know what the rates are, and we all know what let's say the average income is in our country. So you typically, Nairobi is a big market in that sense, but I think the countries as a whole a relatively limited segment that would typically be able to join our specific product within the safari industry.
Yeah, no, completely. But I would say in Kenya, at least, we're in a very lucky position in that there is a middle class, that can travel. Whereas, we're looking at comparing that to Namibia and Botswana, there just isn't the same size of middle class. And in South Africa, we're lucky to have a large, robust domestic tourism industry. But it's very interesting. And following on from that, somebody has asked which tourism markets beside USA and the UK are interesting to you at the moment, and are those markets shifting during COVID? Are we seeing a change?
Well, we definitely see a change. And traditionally, pre-COVID, we have a strong footprint also in. I think we still right? Yeah. As I was changing the screen. Traditionally, or pre-COVID, we also had a strong presence in the Pacific, in Australia, as a market in terms of where tourists come from. During COVID, again, it's a bit early to say. Obviously, a lot is directly related to travel restrictions, not just by governments, but also by employers, we find. And that's very interesting if you're on the ground, and I actually didn't see it coming in that sense. We feel that there's a remarkable contingent of the US market that has been able to travel throughout the crisis. That was a positive surprise. Some of the European markets I had expected to come through stronger than they did. It wasn't quite as much. And like I said, that had more to do, is my guess, with let's say social pressures and employer restrictions as much as government restrictions. So I think that's directly related. And I also expect that as soon as there's anything like a vaccine passport, and we know in the Scandinavian countries, they kind of committed to that already to get it implemented. I think we see a radical shift there, and we will see those people traveling soon. So I think for us, the bulk of our travelers are still from the US and from Europe. I expect that to continue, but I think within that group there has been big shifts, and I think we're going to see again big shifts in the next 6 months.
Yeah. Okay, no, very interesting.
Yeah, and the only thing is indeed Australia and New Zealand is just closed at the moment, right? I mean, and I think that is going to take a while.
No, completely, and Canada as well. So it's interesting times and ever changing as well. Yeah. Gerard, we joked about this in the office today. Would you open an accommodation offering in Arusha in order to complete the Northern Circuit? And would you let me choose the cushions?
Sorry, it is absolutely pouring down here. What was the last part of your question?
Would you open an accommodation offering in Arusha in order to complete the Northern Circuit? And more importantly, would you let me choose the cushions?
I thought that's what you said.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, it would obviously be a very logical move for us to complete our circuit. Somehow we always get, carried away with working in other wilderness areas that need help. Arusha itself doesn't necessarily need help. It would probably help our our bottom line, but we continue to focus on the more exciting stuff out in the reserves and conservancies. So who knows, one day.
I look forward to it. Jeroen, a really interesting question for you. You mentioned a true value add safari specialist. Can you define what that means to Asilia?
So it's along the lines what I said earlier. In our view, if you as an agent are in the source market, know your customers extremely well, and at the same time know the product, you play an invaluable role to make that link, make that connection. Make sure that what these travelers' preferences are, what these concerns are, that they appropriately address, that the itinerary that is being designed meets their, well, and then exceeds their expectations, but and really, you know, follow that through from the very beginning and the first contact point to the very end. We also believe very much in an integrated experience. I know that in the industry there has been sometimes a bit of friction there. I think actually, if you want to create the perfect experience, you have a value add agent that understands the customer totally, and then you have a joint exercise in a way, a seamless exercise in making sure that every touch point is perfect with that specific traveler. And there's a lot that you can mutually and make the most of when it comes to the information as to who they can expect to meet in camp, to any last minute changes, to any special touches, to any special requirements and all that. All that makes a huge difference on the ground. And we do that with agents where we translate that back, especially those that we have a long and deep relationship with, in terms of making sure that as and when they also in our hands on the ground, and there's direct feedback and stuff. And I think that is something that I also hope in the future we can actually extend and enrich. And again, technology can also play a role there in making sure that there's good up-to-date information at every touch point. And people expect that nowadays, right? I mean, if any average airline nowadays have pretty sophisticated apps telling you, you know, which gate in how many minutes and all that. So we need to also be realistic about it as a safari industry and up our game in that space.
It's an exciting time.
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure if this is an easy or a difficult question, because you should never have a favorite child, but somebody has asked, which is your favorite camp?
Is that a question to me?
Pardon?
Is that a question to me?
I'm going to ask both of you. I'm going to go first, though. For me, it's obviously the Highlands. I find our domes very pleasing. So, but Jeroen, do you want to go first?
Absolutely. So we have two daughters, and I love them both dearly, and I would never choose the one over the other. So just that we set the scene here. And likewise, I think, you know, all our camps have quite distinct characters, and the camp itself and the direct area, which I find fascinating. So every time I go to one of the camps, I think, oh, this is so amazing. I go to the next one and think, wow, this is actually also very amazing. So I have a bit of that, and this is not to just... I should say, I mean, obviously, Rubondo comes to mind just because it's so different and it is so rejuvenating. It's perfect climate. It has a beach-like feel. It is very lush because of, I mean, there's these 30-meter high trees, and there's fantastic wildlife. There's fantastic birding, which I enjoy a lot. And it's that combination of water activities and trekking, and it's a bit along the question that you asked earlier. I mean, let's do something different. Well, on Rubondo, everything is different, and there's one little car that brings you from the airstrip, or the boat to the camp, and from there you do anything but the normal. So I think that's pretty exciting. It's definitely one of the favorite children.
I agree. It's very special. I get around that question by saying that's my favorite place in Tanzania. And then I get around and have the Highlands as my favorite camp. That's how I talk my way out of that situation, because I share your love for Rubondo. Gerard, what about you?
Well, it would have been Rebondo. Rebondo to me, it has everything, as Jeroen mentioned. You know, the forest walks. You can game drive there. You've got the boat. It's you know, it's like living in a Jurassic Park movie. It's the most amazing place. And yeah, as a family, we've been there a couple of times, and it's definitely where my boys are happiest. You know, thinking of other camps, I've just come back from Namiri camp, you know, which we recently upgraded, and I haven't spent a huge amount of time in that area, and I find that area and that camp very, very special. Given that area was closed for 20 years, it's just, yeah. I mean, I was there, I think 4 or 5 days ago, in the middle of Gaul copies with 300,000-400,000 wildebeest and zebra around me, and we were the only car. It's pretty difficult to beat that. So yeah, Namiri would be close to it.
Yeah, incredible. This is an interesting question from James. Given the state of the travel industry right now and the challenges of the past 12 months, do you think there's reason to be optimistic about the future? It would be interesting to hear from both of you. Do you want to go first, Gerard?
Sure. I mean, for me, yeah, we are optimistic about the future. We've obviously it's taken us by surprise a little bit, I guess, how long the pandemic has gone on for. But we were fortunate. We did plan well. So no, I mean, you know, we can see it. We can see it in our forward sales. We can see it just in the interest, the engagement that we have. Yeah, we fully expect by mid-year to be firing on all cylinders. And you know, for us to kind of, it's almost like we've had a big break and now we get to do it again. So there's, you know, great excitement within the ranks, and we're starting our training and refurbs are ongoing. So it's almost like, you know, you're just opening a new chapter, and yeah, the world will be a slightly different place, but I think it'll be a better place once we eventually get out of this pandemic.
And the same question to you, Jeroen. Do you think there's reason to be optimistic about the future? You are an optimist, though.
That helps, isn't it? Yeah, no, I'm definitely optimistic along the lines that Gerard says. We see the traction in terms of, you know, inquiries, traffic, and all that. I would say there's two trends. I mean, many people listening in on this call will actually know better, so I need to be careful. But indeed, as you say, being an optimist, I see two specific trends that should help us a lot, and that you pick up on various surveys and news industry articles. And the first is obviously small outdoor travel is obviously at the moment to be preferred over, let's say, all being packed up in museums. So that's an obvious one. But I would also say bucket list travel. I think people are now more conscious than ever, like, oops, we can't take this for granted. You know, who knows what happens in a few years' time, and what is the type of travel that we definitely want to do in our life. And I think obviously what we offer as a safari in East Africa and some of the most iconic landscapes with fantastic wildlife densities, yeah, it's a classic and it's a total bucket list type of experience. So that's a big one. And the other one that I would say is I think there's probably even more now, a bit of an acceleration of a trend in terms of people being conscious and purpose driven. And I think for us as Asilia specifically, having that so much as an integral part of our DNA and what we stand for and the various projects that we run and what we can show about that to our guests. I think that's a big one as well, because throughout this pandemic, as much as that takes all the headlines, there's obviously also a huge awareness of the climate changes in the world and the impact and the importance of conservation. And yeah, if there's one thing that is sort of responsible travel, it's we all know that without safari, the safari industry, areas like the Serengeti or Ruaha or Selous, now called Nyerere, they would probably have been gone already. And they really need that support to keep going and to be, well, as Gerard said, huge carbon sinks for one thing. But also provide economic support to those communities that would otherwise, you know, either get perhaps into poaching or into farming. which would all be bad for these areas.
Yeah, I agree with you. As sort of difficult as things might feel right now, the safari or the responsible safari industry is so well poised for when people can travel again, because we tick so many of the boxes of what people in lockdown are craving. So last question, nice and easy from Fiona. If you can pick only one, what has been your favourite memory of Asilia over the last 15 years? Jeroen, you can go first.
Oh my God. I can't pick one. I can definitely say, I mean, we spoke about Robondo, and having been out there is one, but I mean, we stood on the kopje of Jabali without there being a camp. That is fantastic. But I would also probably pick, you know, our 15-year anniversary. Unfortunately, we couldn't do the same recently, but we have these big annual events as a family where we bring everyone together, and obviously our 15th anniversary was bigger than ever, with, I don't know, it must have been 400 or 500 people, people that have been with us throughout the entire journey, people that we have seen growing from, well, sometimes even poachers or staff chef into managers and all that. I mean, there's nothing more rewarding than seeing that happen. So that would definitely be a big one for me.
Gerard?
Yeah, I was also going to say the annual event. We have an amazing annual event. When I joined Asilia, Jeroen invited me to the first one, and I think at the time it was a couple of hundred people getting together and celebrating the year and various awards. And you know, I'd never seen Tanzanians party, and that was quite something. So you know, 4 or 5 years later, to take a contingent from Kenya down there and see their wide eyes watching this party go on. So that has been a highlight for me during my time at Asilia, and sadly we've not been able to do last year's, and unlikely we can do this year. I mean, the other event I always love to attend is the graduation at Kwayaki Guide School, and to watch the students that we as a company or our guests have sponsored, come out the other end, and invariably 2 or 3 of them join us, and to watch their careers progress. It seems like such an easy to do, but it's not. There's a lot of blood, sweat and tears for the students to even get there, and then to secure the sponsorship that year of the guiding school, and then to graduate and come into the industry. So I love watching that journey. That's obviously right in front of me, living in the Mara and being involved in the school.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that's a very fitting note to end on. Thank you to everybody who joined us this evening, and to everyone who's on this journey with us as Asilia. We wouldn't be where we are today without your support. Please tune in again tomorrow. Tomorrow, Asilia Adventures are going to be unpacked. Apologies if we didn't get to your question, but your ARM manager will come back to you. So thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Thanks. Fantastic.
Thank you.